Hello, I'm Flora speaking out, and thank you for joining me today. And I also want to thank those who sent messages to me. Uh, they're very precious to me. Thank you. I'm thinking a lot these last 2 weeks about the media in general, but specifically about the American radio 90 years ago, around 1935, when I was 7 years old and beginning to understand the power of radio. There was usually only one radio per house back then, usually in the living room, almost always. Sometimes waist high, with a polished cabinet and the center panel through which the sound came, covered with a kind of silk mesh and a wood lattice. You know, if an alien had been observing our family and American families in general, they would have thought this piece of furniture sitting in the living room was probably the family's divine oracle because of the hushed silence as we'd sit around it and listen to it. In the morning, it would usually be the father who would turn it on, listening to the news and the weather report before he went to work. In the afternoon, the mother, if she had leisure, would sit down to listen. They were even then called soap operas, to some kind of drama called As the World Turns, or I remember one specifically called Helen Trent, how she found romance at 35 and even beyond. 35 then was sort of the equivalent of 50 now. In the late afternoon, we children would be sitting around the radio, listening to exciting, scary half-hour dramas like Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, the Lone Ranger. How exciting it seemed, and how our imaginations had to work to try to picture what was going on. And what fun to try to figure out how they made the sounds of horses galloping and wind blowing and hailstorms and the rest of it. Now in the evening, the whole family would gather around, listening, of course, to the news, then drama, comedy, concerts, lectures, politics. On weekends, it was mostly sports. On Sundays, we had the Metropolitan Opera. As an example of the power of the radio back then, most Americans have never heard this, but it really happened. Halloween night, 87 years ago, 1938, when I was 10 years old, Orson Welles, the great dramatist and actor and director, still as a young man, becoming pretty big on radio, put on the drama, The War of the Worlds. Most Americans had never heard the story about the Martian invasion, hadn't made any movies about it. He put it in the format of as if it were actually happening, as a news reporter telling all about these scary ships of aliens, Martians, descending on the America, particularly in the New York area, the eastern seaboard, and people being zapped. He described every bit of it. Now, Orson Welles said later, every 15 minutes, he told his audience this was a drama. But the trouble is, a lot of Americans who maybe have tuned in too late to hear the announcement it was a drama, took it all seriously as if it were really happening. That Martians were landing, and this is actual historical fact, look it up. Thousands in the New York, New Jersey area raced into the streets screaming, calling their neighbors, leaping into cars, driving every possible direction to get away. people rushed to the hospital with fainting spells, panic attacks, rapid heartbeat, and the rest of it. It was an uproar, and the world was laughing at us. And I think Americans mostly tried to block it out of their memory, how embarrassing this was. Quite a story, but I remember it well. Yeah, and my favorite gift of all time was that Christmas when I was about 14. A more wonderful gift than my Mickey Mouse watch a few years earlier, or my first fountain pen, or even my bicycle, was the gift of my own bedside radio. It seemed miraculous. I can still picture it, a gleaming, very little thing, and how I could turn out the light, listen to music, listen to scary drama, listening to people talk, listening to people laugh, listening to people sharing ideas. Our family radio was, you might say, the television, the smartphone, and the internet now all rolled into one. It was our only immediate link with the world outside our town. The newspaper gave the news of yesterday, unless there was some terrific emergency or scandal, in which case they would run extra copies. You've seen in old black and white movies, newsboys shouting on the street, extra, extra, read all about it. But that only happened with the overwhelming events. And of course the newsreels, the movies, gave news of the week. But and long-distance telephone calls were enormously expensive. Most people couldn't afford them, 3 minutes at the most. So the radio was our immediate link with the world around us. Immediacy. This was something new in the history of the world. All right, deeper even than that was the significance of it, that we could say out loud. It was a free forum. We could say out loud what we were thinking if you were there broadcasting. Not just to your neighbors, not just to your town, state, nation, but to the world. We could say what we were thinking and how proud we were as a nation that we had a constitution that protected this freedom. By 1935, the date I'm more or less thinking about, we were very well aware of nations who no longer had that freedom. The adults in the family would have remembered clearly 1917, there in Russia, when Lenin stepped off the train to unleash Bolshevism on Russia. The first thing he did was send armed agents into the broadcasting studios to silence all dissent. That's what dictators do, first of all. Silence the dissent on whatever media is used. Back then, the radio. Now, of course, television shows, or even the internet. To be sure, during Second World War, when, well, people had to have their radios, even in countries of dictators. They had to hear what their beloved dictator was saying, right? All day long, maybe. And to hear the news formed and skewed to the way that suited him. So everyone had their radio. But to listen to the Radio Free Europe, which was broadcast, I think, mainly from the British Isles, was totally forbidden. And if you were found listening, you would be put in prison. I'm not exaggerating. And in our own nation, right since radio began, authoritative types have tried to squash dissent via the radio, or whatever means of media was going on. And every time there's been a pushback. Thank God for it. But now we are endangered in that respect as never before. Now we have a president who not only sues multiple networks and is still suing them. Let's see, quoting one of his recent remarks about possibly suing ABC for bringing Kimmel back. He said, let's see how we do it. Last time I went after that news, that station, ABC, they gave me $16 million. This one sounds even more lucrative. Or a president who says, and again I quote, any negative coverage of me is illegal, not free speech, unquote. And he will keep trying. I needn't rehearse for you this last week the drama of the pushback that brought Jimmy Kimmel back to his show, speaking out freely. But it showed America, thousands of people, unions, actors, directors, ordinary people like you and me, pushing back, and it succeeded. This is what gives me hope. Back to our family radio 90 years ago. One thing the family always listened to together every 4 years were the political conventions. And we listened to both parties. And we listened to everything. I was startled as a child about what I said. They're saying such mean things about each other. They're criticizing the president. And my father saying, that's the beauty of it. We're showing the world we can speak out loud, even criticizing the president. The whole world, that's the beauty of it. This past week, by the way, we celebrated the 1789, when Congress first adopted the Bill of Rights and sent it out to the states for approval. What a week to celebrate the Bill of Rights with the First Amendment, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. I want to go back briefly to my thoughts and feelings at 14, listening in the dark to my precious little bedside radio. At 14, I wouldn't have put it in these fancy words, but trying to tune into my feelings then, I think I could remember the feelings of the awe that I'm in touch with the whole world. I'm free to choose what I listen to. I can turn it on, I can turn it off. I can hear new ideas, and I can explore new ideas. It's up to me. It's the first epoch of history when this was possible. And that's the beauty of it. Thank you for being with me today.